Okay, I think I'm live once more here on the Twitch channel. The Plaid Avenger Twitch channel. Plaid Twitch, for short. Okay. Hello out there in Twitch land. As I often do when we start these things up, could somebody give me a shout out in the chat room? If there is anybody in the chat room, could you give me a shout out to let me know that you can both see me and hear me, both in the audio and visual worlds? And wow, we just got started up and somebody just and Treddy subscribed, or was that from last time? Art cover C is the Velociraptor has reared its head. That means we must be up and running and live and ready to go. Awesome. First time chatters. Love the first time chatters. Get out there and chat it up. First time chatter from La Green Machine 97. All right. I love that we have a French green machine in here. La. Or I guess that would be La Green Machine. Welcome, La Green Machine. First time chatter. And now I will officially launch the Plaid Avenger Twitch time. Tonight's title, if you already read it, hopefully you got a chuckle out of it. Let me see how many of you actually know what it means. Tonight's talk will be, better get NATO. Full title being, Rascally Russians in Europe, ? Better get NATO. Oh, I'm such a goofball, I know. But does anybody out there in Twitch land know what that jingle is actually from? It sounds just like that. The commercial sounded exactly like that. Better get fill in the blank. It wasn't NATO. But that's what many countries across Europe right now are suggesting is, we better get in NATO. I see some other people have chatted in here. REB's in the house saying howdy. Esther Riviera is back in the hizzle. Hello, Esther. And Hollinsworth is back in the hizzle as well. Welcome back, Hollinsworth. So, I would assume that none of you are old enough to get the tagline for better get NATO. There it is. Terminator MT got it. Better get Mako. I loved that jingle back in the day. Okay, for you young people that have no idea what the hell we're talking about, obviously you could go Google this because everything on the world is on the internet now. A first-time chatter, R. Shapiro got Mako. And Mako is, I think it's still around, is a car painting company, and a cheap-ass car painting company. I remember back in the day, they had $99 paint your car specials. No shizzle in this hizzle. $99. Maybe they still do that. I don't know. But can you imagine, even back in the day? I mean, I'm old, but even 30 or 40 years ago, $99 to paint a car? That was outrageous. You could do a better job with a bunch of spray cans. And I did as a youth. I always hand painted in my cars. Anyway, I love the jingle so much that I had to co-opt it for better get NATO. And now we get to the meat and potatoes. What the hell am I talking about? Well, I guess before we start talking about what the hell I'm talking about, welcome everyone from World Regional Geography. Welcome fans, friends, family from around the planet to the Plaid Avenger Twitch channel. I am John Boyer, professor in the Department of Geography here at Virginia Tech, home of the Fighting Hokies, Blacksburg, Virginia. A beautiful spring, almost instantaneously summer day here in Blacksburg for those not in the burg. And a bunch of news stories came across the wire starting yesterday, maybe even the day before that, but intense today, that I felt the need to podcast with speed about because I love this stuff. And here we go. What is it that I've been seeing? Maybe you already know what I'm referring to when I say, better get NATO. But if you don't, here's what's going on in the world around us that is of great interest to me. I just pulled up. This is literally the Google News top headlines that I pulled up right before I went live. Obviously, they always have something about the Russia-Ukraine war, what's going on today. They're doing daily reporting on that. What about this bizarro New York City subway shooting in the was it going to Brooklyn? What a freak. But the ones that caught my attention for international politics that I would like to speak about tonight are these stories here. Finland and Sweden move closer to NATO membership. What? The secret of Ukraine's military success, years of NATO training. What? And there's a bunch of other stories that don't particularly interest me that much. This one does. Schultz irritated by German president's thwarted Ukraine visit. The German president was going to go visit Ukraine and meet with Zelensky, and the president of Ukraine refused. He was like, nope, you guys are being too wimpy, and so I'm not interested in you guys visiting because you're not doing enough to help us anyway. So don't come here acting like you're going to help us. Further down in this news column, France's Le Pen warns against sending weapons to Ukraine. Oh, and under that, Le Pen upset of Macron in France could upend NATO and give Putin a boost. Why are all these stories referencing NATO? What's going on with NATO? Well, that's what we're going to talk about right now. After I shout out to some other people, Nihal's Zero up in the hizzle. Goki's in the house. Welcome back, Goki's. Terminator says some Makos are cheap. The Blacksburg one will do it for less than $2,000. I tried. The Blacksburg one won't do it for less than $2,000. I tried. Seriously, Terminator, their tagline used to be $99 paint jobs. Oh my God. I kept meaning to get one just for funsies. Mexican Goose up in the hizzle. Plaid Katie shouting out to everybody. Smashly's in the hizzle. Spoon Dog 4 shouting out with the shocked Pikachu icon. Always terrifying to me because I feel like maybe he's having some sort of sex we don't want to know about. That icon scares me. Now let's get back to the news stories though. Why am I intrigued? First time chatter from Rye Timex. I like that screen name, Rye Timex. Timex. Here's the next logo, Timex, the watch that takes a licking and keeps on ticking. Is that Timex? I think it is. I think I just got another 1970s logo dropped into this chat room. Thanks to Rye Timex, who reminded me I used to love Timex watches. Okay, so what is happening? Well, first off, you should probably know this already, and if you don't, let me make it clear for you. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is a defensive cooperative group consisting of 30 sovereign states around the planet, mostly European, but the United States and Canada are core members of it too. Thus, the North Atlantic part. It is a geographic reference. These are countries around the Atlantic Ocean. The North Atlantic Ocean, that is, not the South Atlantic. South Atlantic is the ocean between Africa and South America. So, U.S., Canada on one side of the Atlantic, and pretty much all the European countries on the other side. But not all of them. And so this article right here is saying NATO was in crisis. Putin's war made it even more powerful. What is that a reference to? Let me clue you in. The previous U.S. president, what was his name? I always forget. Trump! Former U.S. President Trump actually is no fan of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the world's most powerful defensive military cooperative unit in the history of mankind. I'm sorry, humankind. In the history of humankind. Former President Trump didn't like it. And he didn't like it because he didn't think they spent enough money. He didn't like it because he doesn't like Europeans in general. He didn't like it because he don't like playing with other countries. He didn't like it because he runs with scissors and doesn't play well with others. Even if you're a Trump fan, I think you'll get a kick out of that and agree. All right? So, former U.S. President Donald Trump was no fan of international organizations, really of any stripe. He didn't like any of them. He wanted to make America great again. Obviously, mission accomplished. And in doing so, he was returning to a classic stance that the United States has had on again, off again in history. And this is something that maybe you don't know about. Most of you have been alive in an era where the United States is the sole superpower. in an era where the United States has bases all over the world, where the United States is a world leader. That has not been the case for the entire history of the United States. And in fact, you could go back 50 years, you could go back 100 years before that, and you could go back 50 years before that. The United States quite frequently vacillates between being a global leader and out there as a global connector, and in an internationalizing world as a leader, putting together trade deals and helping establish the UN and NATO and other international groups, including the WTO. But that's one side of the United States. It has vacillated between that, a forward internationalist scope, and the opposite, which is a completely inward-looking isolationist streak. So I know we live in the modern era, and this is the only era you know, and so a lot of people were shocked and dismayed by Donald Trump's isolationist streak, where, again, he ran on it. Make America great again, and the subtext of that is, who gives a shit about everybody else, including our former allies or our current allies. Again, I don't think I'm making fun of former President Donald Trump. These are things he said. These are things he did. These are things he campaigned on. It is a core belief of Trump and Trumpian politics that they should focus only on the United States and let the rest of the world take care of themselves. That is what we call an isolationist attitude, isolationist policy. So when he got into office back in 2016, doesn't that seem like decades ago? When he came into office, the first thing he did was pull out of the TPP. Does anybody even remember that? The Trans-Pacific Partnership was this huge economic bloc that was being formed around the Pacific. On week 1, he pulled the United States out of it. By the way, who started the TPP? The United States did. So that was a really interesting move, and I remember podcasting about it, telling my classes, this is very telling of times to come. This president is making a stand here and saying, I don't like the international system. I don't like playing well with others. And I said then, this will likely ripple to other international organizations that the United States is not only a member of, but a leader in, maybe even NATO. And before Trump left office, he made good on my prognostication, because he did indeed, in the second, third, and fourth years of his presidency, denigrate NATO, make fun of NATO, suggested we should pull out of NATO altogether, berated individual NATO countries for not paying enough money, for not ponying up enough in the kitty, and he had some good arguments, by the way. But the idea that the United States, the creator and natural leader of NATO, would be the one to pull out, put NATO in crisis. So the entire Trump era, the whole Trump 4 years, NATO as an entity was in some trouble, was a house divided. People were arguing about the viability of NATO. Should it even stay around? As you now well know, Vladimir Putin, no fan of NATO, loved Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin has said NATO is a threat to Russia. They keep growing NATO. That makes us feel threatened. And since they invaded Ukraine, since Vladimir Putin personally invaded Ukraine, they have said one of the reasons we're invading Ukraine is because we're pushing back against NATO. It's all NATO's fault. Everything's NATO's fault. And that's the Russian side. And quite frankly, Donald Trump agreed with that at the entree of Putin's war in Ukraine. Donald Trump said, he's a very good guy. That's a clever strategy. He's a good guy, or something like that. So this is not that shocking for those of us that at least armchair historian follow U.S. history, and this movement that the United States has done between full-on isolationism and full-on engagement. And the United States, for all of its faults, and there are plenty, when the United States does something, we go all in, baby. So we're either completely isolationist or we're completely engaged in the world and invading 10 countries. There's no real middle ground. Okay, that is why NATO was in crisis 4 years ago, 5-6 years ago now. Forgetting, I'm lapsing time, at least 5 years ago. It was really in question as if would it even survive. And Vladimir Putin, for all of his faults, of which there are plenty, he has to be second guessing this whole Ukrainian war because he probably should have invaded Ukraine while Donald Trump was president. That would have made more logical sense, right? Because both of those guys didn't like NATO. Both of them wanted to see the demise of NATO, or at least a weakened NATO. And so Vladimir Putin must have terribly miscalculated that NATO was on its last legs and that they were not strong enough or together enough to do anything when and if he invaded Ukraine, which he did 6 weeks ago. And boy, was he wrong. Now, I'm more than willing, by the way, I am more than willing to accept the possibility that Putin knows exactly what he's doing. And he wanted this all to happen so that he can conflagrate to a greater war. I don't know. No one knows what the hell's in this guy's head. Maybe not even him. However, any serious analyst looking at the situation would say, boy, you miscalled that one, Putin, because NATO was in crisis, and 6 weeks ago, Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine has pulled it together like nobody's business, like no one could have imagined it reunifying, especially this quickly. So if he was calculating that there would be disruption and they would fall apart, he was totally wrong. Again, maybe this is part of his master plan. I don't know. But it don't look like it. And it don't look like it because of the stories that I'm now getting ready to tell you on top of this. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Wilbur says, and now NATO is getting back up from the punches. You got it, Wilbur. Our cover C says, does having 6.9K channel points do anything? I don't even know what that means. Does that mean 7,000 channel points? I don't even know what it means. Our cover C. Remember, our cover C. I'm old. I don't understand this technology. You can get points and rewards. That's what Katie says. She'll answer your question.
We need to do something. Like we have to, on our side, give rewards.
I'll give rewards. Just tell me what to do. I love rewarding people. Okay, so what is going on? It's even further entrenching this situation for NATO and perhaps backfiring with Putin. Here's this one from CNN. Putin's bullying backfires as Finland and Sweden edge closer to joining NATO. There it is. That's the news story that's all over the place. Before I even get to Finland and Sweden, NATO is set to send more troops to eastern border near Ukraine, warns Russia against using nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin came out earlier today saying, by the way, any weapons that are being transported on the roads heading towards Ukraine are fair game for us to shoot at, which means he's suggesting he can shoot in missiles or guns into NATO countries to head off arms shipments. That would then escalate into a NATO Article 5 declaration, which could then escalate into nuclear war, and we're all dead. Most of us, the vast majority of us, don't think Putin really wants nuclear war tomorrow. So it's hard to see a world in which he starts firing missiles into Austria to shoot down trucks. But who knows? Again, who knows what's in his head? Other news stories are just from today. Another 400 U.S. troops and aircraft to deploy to Eastern Europe. Other stories I could pull up for the rest of the evening are German forces deploying, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania forces, Polish forces deploying. All the countries in Eastern Europe, and I think even the French are sending some troops. Everybody is now talking, including former U.S. commanders or active U.S. military commanders, saying we probably need to dust off all of our European military bases that we had during the whole Cold War, many of which have been shut down. Another thing former U.S. President Trump did was to declare that the biggest base in Germany was going to be shut down because it was costing money for no good reason. I'm not even sure if that ever happened or if they've reversed it yet, but I'll bet it's going to be reversed. So you're seeing now more and more more and more weapons, more and more perhaps permanent stations that are going to be set up back in Eastern Europe. Cold War, Double Deuce, Part 2 is back on full scale. You might likely see a return to fully staffed military bases with U.S. troops and international troops in Eastern Europe, much like it was a whopping 30 years ago. I know. How much changes in just 30 years. First time chatter, Bird Rock 2015, saying, hello, I'm from the Martin Sheen semester of World Regions. Kaboom! Thank you for reminding me about that, Bird Rock. Tuning in for a class a decade later. That's the spirit, Bird Rock. For those of you not in the know, we actually had Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez visit our World Regions class in Burris Auditorium back in, was it 2015? Was it 2015? It seems like it was earlier than that. It seemed like it was 2010. I think it was like 2010. When did you graduate, Bird Rock? And tell me when you were in the class, what year? Because I thought the Martin Sheen was more like 2010. But Katie will figure it out. Yeah, we got to have Martin Sheen back. So there is story after story of NATO troops being redeployed. Took the class in 2011. Boom. I was close. Thank you, Bird Rock. And thanks for tuning in. More and more military equipment and more, I believe, permanent bases are going to be reestablished back in Eastern Europe. And by the way, a lot of these are going to be new bases. Because if in your head you can think about the old Cold War, many of the current NATO countries used to be behind the Iron Curtain on the bad side during the Cold War. So Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czech Republic, all these were behind the Iron Curtain as part of the Great Soviet Union. They didn't have any NATO bases in them, but they're going to now. So you're going to see a great movement, a rearmament, if you like, but also troop movement to more permanent bases across Eastern Europe. Bases that are going to be even closer to Russia than they were during the Cold War, because again, now Poland's a NATO member that's going to have a ton of military bases near the Russian border. That's not something Vladimir Putin probably is too happy about. In fact, it's got to be the reverse of what he was thinking was going to happen. Again, he's a clever fellow. So we can make some assumptions. Maybe this is exactly what he wanted to happen. Maybe he's being a provocateur and he's done this intentionally knowing NATO was going to reunify and rearm and establish new bases that were even closer to Russia in Latvia, Estonia, Poland, and these other places. Maybe he's using that in order to retrench power for himself as the great leader of Russian state, and now he's got even more reason to protect his people because, look, like I told you, I'm pretending I'm Vladimir Putin, just like I told you, fellow Russians, look, they're coming to get us, they're coming to get us, they're coming to get us, so you better put me in power for life, which he will be. And we're going to have to become even stronger and partner up with China and all these other things. So again, am I willing to accept that this might be part of his master plan? Sure. But it still doesn't look like that much fun. And it sure doesn't make a whole lot of the sense if you're the Russian military or you're part of defense strategy for Russia to have provoked your enemy to get more weapons and more people closer to you. But hey, I'm not a military strategist. Okay, first time chatter from Jazzery. Jazzery is currently in World Regions for the spring semester. Welcome to Twitch, Jazzery. I'm glad you're here. So, rearmament is occurring. By the way, this is why in previous podcasts I've said go buy defense stocks. Go buy all the military applications stocks, defense industries, space industries. All of this stuff is going to be ramping back up just like it did during the Cold War. The U.S. military budget's going to go through the freaking roof in the next 5 years, if not for the rest of my life anyway. And the European countries' defense budgets are all increasing across the board. Every single European country is going to spend more money on defense. So buy defense stocks. Okay, first time chatter from Rusprey1. Rusprey says, Putin needs to tuck away his millimeter Peter. Haven't heard that since grade school. And declare absolute victory. Smoking that good that North Korea smokes. And Rusbury is another old, decades ago world regions. Welcome, Rusbury. And thanks for the Millimeter Peter shout out, because I haven't heard that since I'm pretty sure third grade, but I love it. R. Shapiro says, and to think the U.S. military budget was already through the roof. Correct, R. Shapiro. Okay, but that gets me to the crux of what's happened today, last 2 days, that's got Putin's panties in a bunch. And if they're not, they should be. And that is Finland is deciding on NATO membership in weeks, not even months or years, in weeks. It's going through the government process. I don't even know how Finland's going to do it. I assume they're going to do some serious polling within the country. I don't think it's going to come down to an actual vote. I don't think the Finnish people themselves are going to vote on it, but they are playing it out in the government, in the legislative and executive branches. Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin says her country will decide whether to apply to join NATO within weeks. She saw no reason to delay the decision any further, she said at a joint news conference alongside Sweden's Prime Minister. Her comments coincided with a report to the Finnish parliament that said membership of the bloc could result in increased tensions on the border between Finland and Russia. Oh, there's not going to be could. It's definitely going to increase tensions. By the way, I don't know if I put this story up, but I don't know if it was the defense minister, or I think it was just a member of the parliament, a member of the Duma. I think it was a congressperson in Russia who came out and said, NATO's signing its own death warrant if it joins NATO. We'll destroy them. I think it was like a congressperson. I don't think, it wasn't Putin, and it wasn't, I don't think, a high government official. But that gives you the sense of what some Russians think about that. Finland and Russia share an 800-mile border, more like 830-mile border. It is largely not guarded. There's not armaments built up on it. Finland and Russia have been at war at least 2 times to my memory. 2 different wars. Finland won both of them. I know, shocking to many. And Finland could have joined NATO back when NATO was formed up in 1949. But knowing it would agitate the Soviet Union at the time, and remember, just after World War II, or during World War II, and just after, the Soviet Union was allies with the United States, and allies with the UK, and allies with France. So as NATO was forming up, it was decided, the Finns themselves decided this, but after some speculation and talking with everybody, that it would be best if they did not join. They were invited, and they said, yeah, we should join, but they knew that would stoke tensions unnecessarily, and so they decided, and this is like 1950 or 51, that they would not join NATO intentionally, so that it wouldn't piss off the Russians. I'm sorry, the Soviets. And so they wouldn't have to have a 830-mile armed to the teeth border. That's why they didn't join 70 years ago. But they're rethinking it now. To the comments. Spoondog says, a few weeks ago I commented that prediction markets had the odds of either Sweden or Finland applying to join NATO at 30%. You said you thought the chance was much higher. I forgot to buy shares. Now they're trading at 92%, and I'm consigned to a life of poverty. Me too, Spoondog. I didn't even know there was such a thing. You could bet on that. I would have bet heavy. Our cover C has this scary mutant child crying. And Rusbury says, welcome to NATO, my Finnish friends. Ari B's up in the hills little saying, wild that then on the other hand, we have one of the big French election candidates being so publicly anti-NATO, anti-assistance toward Ukraine, and is still picking up a hefty chunk of the votes despite it, or maybe because of it, when it seems most other Western countries are trending in the exact opposite direction. You are correct, Ari B's, and I'll get to that story here in another 5 or 10 minutes. And Rusby says, look at our Finnish friends, didn't join NATO as they were in the dark. Bad joke of the fact they don't get hardly any daylight. Oh, they're getting ready to have 24 hours of daylight in parts of Finland, so they get plenty, just at different times of the year. So what else do I got in this story here? The report warns that military force might be used solely. This is a report from the Finnish defense folks to the government. Report warns that military force might be used solely against Finland if they were not part of NATO. and that the security situation in Europe and Finland is much more serious and more difficult to predict than at any time since the Cold War, and maybe even during the Cold War. It is also noted that were Finland to join the bloc, it would be forced to spend up to 1.5% more of its budget on defense, which is what they're going to have to debate about, but added that the membership of the alliance would offer the country a greater capacity to defend itself. Finland has already announced a 40% increase in its defense budget by 2026. Let me make sure I read that correctly. It was noted it would have to spend 1.5% more of its budget on defense. And the next line, Finland has announced it's going to a 40% increase in its defense budget by 2026. So, yeah. And this last line, any potential application would also welcome a bid by neighboring Sweden to seek membership of the bloc. It added, in other words, they want to go it together. And Finland and Sweden are now, next story, both expected rapid domestic debate on NATO membership. Again, this is something that usually takes years, and they're saying, what's the point? We kind of all know that the poll numbers are really high in both countries right now amongst the populace. They historically hovered around 50-50, and during the latter end of the Cold War and the intervening 90s decade, most people, it was way less than 50% of Swedes or Finns would have wanted to join NATO. That's turned around significantly in the last 2 months, and now those numbers have flip-flopped, and you're looking at 50, 60, 70% of those polled are saying, yeah, I think we should join, or at least we should start talking about joining. So that is what's in the air right now, my friend. And I don't know who the hell this awesome supermodel is for NATO. I want to be a NATO supermodel. Or is this the Swedish Prime Minister? Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson wants to join NATO already in June this year, according to SVD. Sweden will apply for membership during... Oh, shit, I didn't mean to touch that. Whoops. Sweden will apply for membership during the NATO meeting in Madrid, the 29th and 30th of June. A lot of stuff going to be going down in June, my friends. We could now be seeing the beginning of the expansion of the NATO bloc. And let's talk about that for 1 second. What does that look like? By the way, are there anybody else applying? Not that I know of. The Swiss, maybe. No, I'm joking. The Swiss will never join NATO. They don't have to. They are in the middle of NATO. Nobody's ever going to touch the Swiss. But one never knows. They actually have voiced support for the NATO enlargement. They voiced support for the EU and Team West in general for sanctions against the Russians because of their invasion of Ukraine. Sweden usually never even says anything. So even Sweden is kind of unified here in Team West. But NATO in Europe, hopefully you can see this map. NATO was founded in 1949 by 12 nations. The 12 nations can we see in light blue there. So you got, it's not showing on the map, the United States and Canada. But we have Iceland, the powerhouse military force. Iceland, Norway, the UK, France, Italy, Portugal, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg. Those are the originals. Did I miss anybody? Denmark, the Danes. Don't mess with the Danes. They used to be Vikings. So that was the original 12. And in the intervening decades of the Cold War, you had Germany. Once it was unified, Germany joined. Then Spain joined. Turkey actually was one of the first second-round inductees in 1952. So Turkey and Greece jumped in the 50s. I think Spain jumped in the 60s. I think Germany jumped in the 80s once it was unified. And then once the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991... Spoondog says, you laugh at Iceland, but they have the White Walkers. Wouldn't it be awesome if somebody had a magical army in the real world? Rustry says, I miss all the comments by Rustry and all these crazy icons they're throwing up there. Jasri says, is there anyone that would veto them? No, there is no vetoing in NATO. It's just a general discussion amongst NATO members, and things just happen. once everybody's kind of informally just vaguely nodded their heads. And if you think I'm being contrite about that and that I'm just blowing you off and summarizing, I'm not. That's actually how it works. Every major decision in NATO is around a table with all NATO members, and they don't even take a vote. They just talk it out. They talk it out until a general consensus is just kind of agreed upon. Yep, okay, we're going to do this. Okay, we all good? All right, we're going to go do this. That will be how they induct Finland and Sweden. But by the way, there will be no talk. Everybody's going to be like, yeah, let him in. This is great. We have no problems. And now Rusbury says, all the money into defense. We gladly accept you beautiful blonde bombshell Swedes into NATO. Boom. The Swedish supergroup ABBA will come up with a new NATO theme fighting song. That's what I'm waiting for. Mic drop on that one. If that comes to pass, I need to quit and become a official prognosticator. Rusby says Belarus kind of needs to join NATO, otherwise they are 80% surrounded by NATO, and Ukraine seems like a risk. No, Rusby, Belarus will actually very soon be completely reabsorbed back into Mother Russia. You heard that prediction here first as well. Russia will just politically reunify Belarus into Russia proper. You heard it here first. I'm surprised it's taken this long. Rover C says, isn't Belarus a Russian puppet state? They are. That's why they're just going to be folded back in. The only reason they're not being officially folded back in yet is because as a sovereign state that's independent, they have a seat at the United Nations, and they're separate, so they can always jump up and cheer for Russia. They can say, we're not Russia, we're an independent state, and we love Russia, we support them, they're right. And they can vote with Russia at the United Nations. I'm suggesting that Russia probably doesn't even care about that so much anymore, because Russia doesn't care about the United Nations anymore. Russia doesn't care about the international law anymore. They don't care about the international rules and regulations and norms anymore. So what the hell do they need Belarus to vote for them or vote with them at the United Nations? I wouldn't be shocked if Russia stopped going to the United Nations, quite frankly. So given that, there's no more power in having puppet states that have votes at the UN because you don't care about the UN. I think they'll likely just completely reabsorb Belarus soon, especially if street protests start back up again. If there's any sort of political protest, which was happening all last year, Putin will just come in and be like, nope, stop, you're ours now. Stop arguing about crap. You're not free. You're not having any more votes. So what happened? Back to the NATO story. What happened next? Well, the Soviet Union imploded in 1991 and voted itself out of existence. And a whole bunch of countries, and sorry, I know I'm boring you because if you took my class, you already know all this stuff. A bunch of countries that were not in NATO because they were behind the Iron Curtain or part of Soviet Russia or Soviet Union were now free independent states, and they did not want to in the future be reabsorbed by great Soviet Russia. So they very quickly jumped in. The first round of inductees was Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary. And in the intervening, since the 21st century has kicked off, they have been joined in the ranks by Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, now Albania, Croatia, Slovenia, Macedonia. And that gets us up to current events where Ukraine says, we would also like to be in NATO because much like all the countries that Boyer just listed, we're afraid of a more powerful Russia getting back on its feet and taking us back over again, and we don't want to do that. We would like to not be part of Russia ever again. And that's where we're all caught up now. That didn't work out for Ukraine. They did not get in fast enough, although under former U.S. President George Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney visited Ukraine and Georgia multiple times to encourage them and try to talk other NATO members into accepting Ukraine into the ranks. And that was 20 years ago, my friends. I remember those news stories. 15 years ago. Yeah, 15 years ago, near the end of the second Bush presidency. They were quite active trying to get NATO to absorb or let Ukraine join. What a different world we'd be in right now had they pulled that off. Dick Cheney sitting in his house with his Darth Vader mask on going, I told you. I told you, Luke, you're not my son, and we should have let Ukraine in. So that's how we got to be in this situation. And now back to Finland and Sweden. Finland and Sweden have said, hey, you already heard me talk about Finland. They said, no, we're not. We share a border with Russia. This is during the Cold War. We're not trying to piss them off. We have a peace treaty between them. We're chill. Sweden, perhaps under the guidance of the Swedish supergroup ABBA, said, no, we're going to, like the Swiss, we're going to be neutral on this too. Finland's neutral. We don't see any need to join NATO. And, we're not trying to piss off the Russians either. We're chill. Those days have now passed, obviously, in just the last 6 weeks of human history, because now both these countries are like, yeah, remember that time 70 years ago when we said we didn't want to join because we weren't worried about Russia? We are now worried about Russia. What's interesting to me about the addition of Finland and Sweden, by the way, is those are the Nordic states way up north. And them along with Finland, with Norway, comprise the whole Scandinavian peninsula. And they're in Arctic territory. And Vladimir Putin has designs on increasing and doing a lot more activity in Arctic territory. So this is a game changer for even economic activity and for transportation up in the Arctic Circle, because now there's more of a presence, and there's going to be more of a true presence up there. So this is now going to force Russia to do a lot different things for defense in an area that it didn't used to care about, and because of global warming, an area that it was going to be exploiting a lot more and building more cities in and more trains through and shipyards, and all this stuff is happening in the Arctic. And now they're going to have to worry about an increased NATO presence up in this area. Huh? See, I'm always thinking outside the box. Is there any comments that I need to read out? I see people talking to each other now. Oh, did I miss some? I'm sorry. R. Shapiro says, how long do you think it will be before Belarus is reabsorbed? Unpredictable, R. Shapiro, but I give it a couple years. And I'd give it less. Again, if you start to see street protest, any uprising against Lukashenko, the current dictator of Belarus, any kind of major uprising against him, Russia will come in and stomp it out and might reabsorb at that point. And I have to assume when Lukashenko kicks the bucket, that will likely be a catalyst for Russia to come in and just take over the country. Because there won't be another Lukashenko. He's been a dictator in charge of the place for 30 years. He's irreplaceable, I guess. And so they won't have another strong bully to hold that country together. So that bully will have to be Russia. Let's see. Spoondog 4 says, isn't that where Waterloo is? I don't know. Hi, YouTube says, hey, do you think the Fourth Reich will cause tension between rising EU power and the United States? Who are you referring to as the Fourth Reich? You talking about what I've mentioned in the past, that Germany, I did a podcast a long time ago about Germany as the Fourth Reich is risen in Germany, and it's an economic powerhouse, not a military one. But Germany is now rearming because of what's happening in Ukraine. So are we concerned that Germany is going to reassert its leadership role in Europe by force? Not so much. That's like a parallel universe, parallel history type of exploration for fun, for fan fiction. No one really thinks that a Nazi-style Fourth Reich is going to rise in Germany. Germany is going to rearm more than it has been. It's got a military, but not like a Nazi military. It might start to regain its military strength in a significant way. Having said that, the reason why the German president was denied a visit to Ukraine is because Germany is seen as not flip-flopping, but being soft on all this. They're going back and forth. Germany came out strong and said, hey, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Germany surprisingly joined the ranks and said, yep, we're going to establish sanctions against Russia. We're actually going to cut off the Nord Stream pipeline, or is it Nord Stream 2 pipeline? That was a huge billion-dollar venture to bring Russia's natural gas to Germany, which they were needing and relying on. And so they did a lot of things that even I was surprised about. I'm like, that's interesting. Germany and Russia are economically kind of tight. So Germany was not too keen to punish Russia, but surprised us all, they did. And Germany has been kind of a leader saying, no, we're going to spend more on defense. We're going to help reunify NATO. We're going to be a leader. We are going to stand up to the Russians on this. But now they're softening their stance again already, because now prices are going up. Inflation's going through the roof. Energy costs are going up. They don't have any energy to replace the stuff they get from Russia. Food prices are going up. And so now the Germans are starting to perhaps hedge their bets a little bit, and we're not sure they're going to be a strong leader as they said they were going to. And they have not been sending any weapons to Ukraine, which is why Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, dissed them. And like, I don't need to talk to you. You're not doing anything for us. So we're not exactly sure where Germany is right now. But to answer your question, hi, YouTube. No one's really worried about a Nazi-esque Fourth Reich rising. And by Nazi-esque, I don't mean politically that they're going to embrace fascism. I just mean Nazi-esque in terms of, are they going to build a giant military and take over Europe? No. In fact, they're not even sure what the hell they're going to do next week at this point. So not worried about that. Mostly they're being encouraged to keep up a strong front and to remilitarize a little bit. They're not being discouraged. No one's worried about them going too far. Their current worry is they're not doing enough. Cool? Okay. Mexican Goose says, do you see the news headline of Boris Johnson wearing a stab vest? And he wore a normal suit when he went to Ukraine and walked around with Zelensky. I did not see that, Mexican Goose. However, I did see a story with Boris Johnson that said they were going to send more British troops to permanent bases in Eastern Europe. And they were going to up military and foreign aid to Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden earlier this week said, yep, we're sending another $300 million worth of weapons and aid to Ukraine. So stuff is still pouring in there. What will come of it remains to be seen. Stab a fool. Thanks, Rusty, for that one. Only here for the podcast. Hey, welcome back, Only here. Super NATO Trooper. Yeah, Super Troopers. Spoondog says the top song at every pub in Liverpool right now is F the Tories. Oh my God, you guys are the best. Mexican Goose says, oh yeah, what's the Pakistan situation with regards to their prime minister? Side note, just very quickly, the prime minister, Imran Khan, was ejected and disrespected, and they already replaced him. A new coalition government was formed way faster than anybody, including me, thought it was going to. And they already have a new prime minister. Imran Khan has promised that he's going to rally his troops / the youth of Pakistan and have protests and shut the whole country down. That has not happened yet, but it remains to be seen what he's going to do. Let's see. Hannah McMurray says, sorry I'm late, Mr. Bory. You do not have to apologize, Hannah. I'm just glad you're here. Rubik's Cuber up in the hizzle. What's going on, Rubik's Cuber? Inflation, it's transitory. Of course it is. Hannah says, Biden said we should be expecting a food shortage because of Ukraine. Do you know anything about this? Rusby says, start hoarding toilet paper. The food shortage that Biden is talking about is not in America. We are still as overweight as ever. We're not going to run out of food here. He's talking about that Ukraine is one of the bread baskets of Europe. In fact, it's called the bread basket of Europe. I know. Crazy, right? Ukraine is exceptionally rich soils. It's a huge country, by the way. It would cover like half the eastern seaboard if you put it on the United States. It's a giant country. And it has historically been a huge grain supplier, particularly wheat. Wheat and sugar beet. The wheat and beet. That's all you need to know. And there you go. It's 8:49. 8:49. If you are currently in world regional geography and you want 10, count them 10 points. You have to in the next 2 minutes. It's 8:50. In 2 minutes, you have to email me. You have to email me your screen name and Wheats and Beets. Wheats and Beets is the password to get 10 points. Wheats and Beets in the next 2 minutes. Password is wheat and beets. Okay. That's what he's talking about, Hannah. There is now a worldwide grain shortage that's rippling out to the entire food chain because our food chain on planet Earth is now so intertwined and interrelated that a shock here ripples out and affects things in other places. Rest assured, I can't imagine we, the United States, imports a single grain of Ukrainian wheat, nor do we need their sugar beets. The United States is a huge producer of food, huge producer of grains, huge producer of corn, actually a huge producer of sugar beet. So it won't affect the United States directly. It is affecting Europe directly. That's one of the reasons why food prices are going up in Germany, along with fuel prices, really all across Europe. But it's hitting home hardest in Germany, and that's why they're starting to soften a little bit on what they perhaps are going to do about Russia. They're still a strong member of Team West, but they're hedging a little bit right now. Our Cover C says, does that mean we'll expect more wheat and beets? We'll export more. Yes, it could be our Cover C. The United States produces hell tons of food. We export hell tons of food. And you could see this, and this is going off on a wild tangent that's a podcast of its own. But the whole Ukraine situation is possibly, I think probably, going to cause what I'm calling the Great Bifurcation. You heard it here first. The Great Bifurcation is upon us. And I really need to do a whole podcast just on this. But my reference here is a bifurcation is a splitting of one system into two separate systems. So it's not tearing a single piece of paper in half and you're like, oh, it's the same thing. It's no. I'm talking about almost like cell division. A global system is now under threat of bifurcation that's going to tease itself apart into two separate operating systems. Okay? Two entirely separate operating systems could happen, and it could happen soon. And what I mean by operating systems, you could see a tearing apart of a global system into two financial systems, with the Team West on one side and Russia and China and their allies on the other. You could see perhaps the United Nations splitting apart, because what's the point? If China sides up with Russia, what's the point of the United Nations? Those two will block everything. No one will ever do anything. And so you might see the United Nations just split apart. Be like, what's the point? We're just going to have our people in our systems. You're going to see a bifurcation of a whole lot of things like the WTO, the World Trade Organization, because no one's trading with Russia. And if China partners up with Russia, they'll just do their own thing. You could see a bifurcation away from the U.S. dollar as an international monetary standard. You could see, nope, half the world uses the dollar and half the world maybe is going to use the Chinese yuan. So I'm predicting that's going to happen. Why did I bring that up? Because it will happen with food systems too. So you could be seeing the beginnings of a bifurcated food system where half the planet, or two halves of the planet, say, we don't trade with all of these other countries. We're only going to trade within our networks of countries that are friends of ours, and that will redo how all food moves. That's the stress that Europe is living under right now, because it's starting already because of the lack of grain coming out of Ukraine, coupled with the fact that no one wants to buy anything from Russia because we have an embargo against them. Russia is another huge supplier of both sugar beet and wheat and oil and gas and lots of other things. So bifurcation, that's the word of the day. I'll do a whole lecture on that at some point in the future if you like. Okay, but I should try to wrap things up and get us out of here so we can get back to partying. I already mentioned this. This is a very fascinating component for me. Putin faces more NATO in the Arctic after the Ukraine invasion. As I was suggesting earlier, the introduction of both Finland and Sweden changes the game for Putin's play in the Arctic. Russia has already claimed half of the Arctic Sea as Russian territory. Want to know more about it? Purchase one of these comic books that we produced 15 years ago. I produced this comic book. Pretty sure. Didn't we? Didn't we put a date on this sucker somewhere? I don't think we did. No, we had to copyright something in here. There it is, December 2008. How many years is that? 13? Where's my math off? 14? I wrote this comic book when we created the Plaid Avenger, and it features Vladimir Putin, if you can see right there. And I was intrigued enough to write this comic book because it was when Russia was planting a flag on the true the true North Pole underwater, and was using that as a reference claim for half the Arctic Sea. Think about how important and strategic that is. As global warming gets rid of all of the ice up in the Arctic Circle, you're going to have all transportation routes reworked. All shipments from China and Japan to Europe, or perhaps even America and South America, will go over the top of the globe, not around the continents. So Russia has a very bright future ahead of them, which again, it mystifies me why Putin's making this move, but whatever. He's a smart guy and a judo champion and a leader of a country. I'm not. But it doesn't seem like a very smart long-term play, because Russia's going to get super rich and be super awesome without doing a damn thing. It doesn't need Ukraine at all because it's got untold resources opening up in the Arctic and thousands of miles of Arctic shore that's going to be a transportation hub for Eurasia. So a lot going on there. But now Putin faces more NATO in the Arctic after this Ukraine invasion. Let me see if they have a map. They have a map. No map. Damn it. Why won't you have a map? Let's see what it says. The Finnish president asked NATO chief how to join. Sweden more hesitant. Living memories of war keep Finns on alert. I like that. And Moscow has threatened serious consequences if they join. Well, whatever. You get the point. This is a new world now. Oh, look at all this great Arctic pictures up here. They will have to arm the Finnish-Russian border, and it will affect all sorts of things and flow of distribution of goods and the stationing of troops. Probably not what Putin wanted to do there either. And to summarize, why is all this happening now? Why are Sweden and Finland and perhaps others thinking about joining NATO, and it's such a big deal? And why is NATO pulling together? It's not simply because Russia invaded Ukraine, by the way. It's very easy to paint a portrait that NATO needs to unify and Finland needs to join NATO, because if they don't, Russia's going to invade them and take over. I actually don't think that. I don't think Russia was going to invade Finland. I'm not even sure Russia was going to try to invade, Austria or any other country or Bulgaria. I had been predicting for a while that Russia would pull some shenanigans in Estonia and Latvia, and I still stand by that. I think shenanigans are coming. But now that NATO is rearmed and reunified, Russia's going to have a much harder time pulling shenanigans in Estonia and Latvia. So my point here is this all about that everybody's just scared Russia's really going to invade them? It's really not. It's not. It's got a lot to do with these next two stories that I'm going to show you, and then we're going to get the hell out of here because it's already 9 o'clock. This is a story from 2019. And when I referenced earlier that former U.S. President Donald Trump was no fan of NATO, this wasn't my opinion. Trump discussed actively pulling the U.S. from NATO, say aids amid new concerns over Russia. He did attack NATO countries openly. He did mock NATO countries openly. And this, by the way, scared the living bejesus out of the whole U.S. Defense Department and the U.S. defense industry and all ambassadors when Trump said, I don't like NATO, I want to pull out. I mean, the entire government of the United States and the entire defense industry of the United States and the entire Defense Department of the United States was like, what? That's not cool with us. It's bizarre. And I'm bringing this up because, sorry, my friends, this is maybe going to hurt some people's feelings. There's every indication Donald Trump is going to run for president again. And to me, there's every indication he will win as president again. And so, by again, I don't mean that he won the last time. He won the first election. He did not win the second election. I'm sorry for all the Trumpites who think, oh, it's all fake. It's not. But I think he's got a decent chance, if not the odds, to win the next U.S. presidential election. I just call them like I see them, folks, not like I want to see them. And so the European states in NATO and other European states like Finland and Sweden that ain't in NATO are rightly worried that if former U.S. President Trump becomes once again U.S. President Trump, that he very well might pull the U.S. back out of NATO, or at least back off of NATO. At least not contribute as much. Maybe seriously just say, I don't care about him. We're not going to do anything. You got to think about this. The European countries have to consider that real possibility. And that's perhaps what's pushing Finland and Sweden to join more than a threat of Russia. By the way, Sweden has 0% chance of Russia invading them. That's not going to happen. They'd have to invade Finland first, for God's sakes. And that's not going to happen. So Sweden is not worried about being invaded by Russia. They are much more worried about the United States, perhaps under a future President Trump or someone like Trump, pulling the U.S. out of its leadership role. And that leaves them very much more exposed for the future. Not for tomorrow, not for next year. For the next 5 to 10 or 20 years. If NATO disintegrates because the U.S. deems it so, then Sweden's got to worry. And Finland's got to worry. And they're worrying about it now. So it makes more sense, given Russia's aggression, to go ahead and nip it in the bud and be like, you know what, let's go and join this group now while they're powerful. Makes a statement. We're in the group. And all of us are going to raise our budgets, right? By the way, I think here's some good data for you. 3 charts that show why Trump thought NATO was a bad idea. And again, this is another old story from 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. As NATO celebrated its 70th birthday, Donald Trump was making fun of it. And here is why he was making fun of it, by the way, if you can see these charts. This is a 2019 estimated defense spending as a share of GDP, for all the countries. I'm sorry, I missed some comments over here. Spoon Dog says we should just arm Santa's elves. Agreed. Mexican Goose references China's baby birthing islands. This is my favorite island fact. I remember when I used to say, Todd talked about China birthing babies on those islands. Pedestrian of the Apocalypse, love the screen name, solemnly raises glass in direction of Mariupol. Yep, agreed. My glass is being raised too. Good call, pedestrian. First time chatter for Mr. Gaming Person says, do you think Joe will run again? I mean, if he's alive, I'm trying to recall, maybe someone can go Google it. Has a sitting U.S. president ever not ran for a second term? Not in my lifetime. I can name you several U.S. sitting presidents that lost their bid for a second term, Donald Trump being one of them. But George Bush, the original George Bush, was another. Jimmy Carter was another. Gerald Ford was another. Lyndon Johnson. Yeah. Well, he kind of did 2 terms. I mean, he took over when JFK was assassinated, and then he did run and won. Yeah, but he didn't run again. Yeah, good call. Good call, the blind barber. Very good call. And Spoon Dog. Yeah, it's rare. So my instinct is, and this is going to piss off perhaps some Democrats and or piss off some, I don't know, cancel culture people or piss off some feminists, but I'm not trying to piss anybody off. I'm telling you, I'm giving you the Boyer prediction. This is just a Boyer prediction. My prediction is that Joe may feel compelled to run again, but in 2 years, we're still 2 years out. He may not be up for it. And therefore, they will make the move that they think will be a good strategy, that he'll say, well, I'm going to step down and let Kamala Harris run for president. And isn't this going to be great? We're going to have our first woman president and our first black woman president. And this will be great. And so here's the Boyer prediction that might piss people off. If they do that and Trump runs against them, Trump will trounce them. I mean, it won't even be close. And I'm not saying that as a Trump fan. I find him personally reprehensible. I don't particularly like. I am a true gentleman in most respects, so I never liked Trump's antics. I just kind of, I'm for more proper etiquette and behavior. That's why I don't particularly like him and never did. So I'm not saying this because I'm a fan of Trump and I'm like, yeah, he's better than them. I'm just saying the Democrats already misplayed how popular they thought Hillary was going to be. And she did win the popular vote. But again, that doesn't matter in our system. Only the Electoral College does. And so they seriously mismanaged and were completely misled that they thought Hillary was going to blow Donald Trump out of the water. Obviously, that did not happen. And so to me, if they do that play where Joe steps down and puts the vice president up to run, they're doing the same playbook. And why would you possibly think it didn't work the first time? Why would you possibly think it's going to work the second time when the country's even more polarized than it was the first time? So again, I don't mean to offend anybody about that. If you're a Kamala Harris fan, but quite frankly, the current President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are not terribly popular right this second and are not doing terribly well in the polls, even with Democrats. So it's going to be a tough call to see who they are going to want to run against Donald Trump in 2 years' time. Again, I don't really particularly pay attention to American politics that much, just enough because you get inundated with it, so I know what's going on. If I was one of the Democrat people, pollsters, advisors, I actually would pick 2 new people. I'd be like, no, let Joe retire. He's old. Pick somebody newer and fresher and younger that's more vibrant and get out on the campaign trail and try to rally. That, to me, would be the way to go to face off against Trump. But that's not how these systems work. They are old and sluggish, and they are resistant to change. So I guess you're going to see Joe Biden run against Donald Trump here in 2 years. And I don't like the odds for Joe Biden. I'll tell you that it doesn't look good. But who knows? 2 years is a long time, and a lot of things change in 2 years, as witnessed by Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine. I'm sorry, I missed off on some comments. Let me get through these figures real quick, and then I'll get the comments and we'll wrap it up here. The reason why Donald Trump suggested he didn't like NATO, and again, I think personally it's more because he's an isolationist. He said, America first, don't care about the rest. But he could point to numbers like this and say, look at the number of, look at the defense spending the United States does. 3.5% of the U.S.'s GDP goes to defense. And then you can see, if you can squint your eyes and see this on your screen, you can see Greece is next. This is by percentage of GDP spent, not total amount. So obviously the United States total amount is gigantic. The United States spends more on its defense than all these countries put together every year. So this is a percentage of GDP. Greece actually, and 2.0 is the NATO guidelines for how much each NATO member is supposed to spend. You're supposed to spend 2% of your GDP to be a member. You're getting the benefits of membership. You're supposed to spend that money for the common whole. Pony up into the kitty because you're getting the benefits. And Donald Trump could rightly say back in the day, nobody's even doing 2%. Nobody but the U.S., Greece, and the UK are even doing the minimum. Why would we continue to spend so much money to protect all these slackers? Now, again, I don't think that personally, but that's what Donald Trump thought, and he had a point. Here's defense expenditures in billions of U.S. dollars based on 2015 prices and exchange rates. The U.S. is in yellow. So if you can make out those bars, the U.S. is the bottom part of the bar in the bright yellow. And the top part of the bar in orange is NATO, Europe, and Canada. It's all the rest of NATO put together is a fraction of what the U.S. spends. Now, again, the U.S. spends its money on its own personal defense, too. So Donald Trump did misinterpret these for his own advantage. He would say, oh, my God, look, in 2019, we spent $685 billion, and all the rest of NATO together only spent $300 million. You guys are ripping us off. You didn't spend $685 billion just on NATO. That's what you spent on the United States, and NATO was a component of that. The United States has tons of money it spends for its own defense, including our entire nuclear arsenal. So there is, I won't say you're comparing apples and oranges here, but it's a false analogy to say, oh, you guys don't spend as much as us, therefore you're not helping NATO as much as we are. It's like, the United States is definitely the core, make no bones about it. But it's not as simple as saying you should spend as much as us, because the U.S. spends a lot on itself. And I'll let you go through that if you want to look at defense expenditures as a share of GDP over time. And you can see how after the Cold War ended in 1989, that all defense spending went down. And then the U.S. has popped again in 2008, 2009, and then started sliding back down again. But the NATO, without the United States countries, fell below the 2% line back in the year 2000. So there is something to be said of, yeah, the NATO countries need to pony up a little bit more. Now I'll get to the chats and wrap this up. Spoondog and The Blind Barber pointed out Lyndon Johnson. Good call. Only here for the podcast as you're saying that Sweden and Finland likely would have attempted to join without the next couple of years, regardless of whether Ukraine was invaded. No. I don't know that it would have came up as quickly. The invasion of Ukraine has certainly served as a catalyst for all these events. It sped it up. Would it have happened naturally? It already was a podcast. I had been looking at stories for the last several years about how the Finns in particular, the poll numbers were ticking up for NATO membership support among Finns, and it was being talked about even years ago. So this isn't completely brand new. And without the Russian invasion, I don't know that I'd be talking about it right now. But I think the closer we got to the U.S. election, it might have cropped up on its own, even if Russia had not invaded Ukraine. It very well could have. And by the way, only here for the podcast, here's another reason it might have come up even without the Russian invasion. My last story, France's Le Pen backs rapprochement between NATO and Russia. Far-right leader affirms her intention to repeat France's 1966 move of leaving NATO's integrated military command while still adhering to its key Article 5 on mutual protection. Let me unpack that for you real quick. Marie Le Pen is the Donald Trump of France, and it was a dead heat vote last Sunday. So current President Macron has to do a runoff against the next most popular candidate, which is Marie Le Pen, in less than 2 weeks' time. A week from this Sunday is the next French election between those two leaders, between the centrist Macron and the far-right Le Pen. And Le Pen today said, if I win, I want to be friends with Russia. And I think that all this is a joke. We really shouldn't be throwing our future away for Ukraine. That's completely her right. The people support that idea, including Donald Trump. But most importantly for me, she stated very specifically, I'm going to repeat France's 1966 move of leaving NATO's integrated military command. Do you all understand what that means? So back in the day, right after World War II, the French were kind of embarrassed about that whole, surrendering to the Nazis thing. And when they still a little bit of egg on their face, a little bit embarrassed about that. And so after the Nazis were defeated and the free world was free again and then NATO formed up, the French joined NATO, but the French saw themselves too much as an independent leader. They're a leader. We're a strong country. We don't follow commands of other people. So they were put off by the fact that in the superstructure of NATO, in its original formation, was put into play that the forces, let me back up. The bureaucracy of NATO is going to be stationed in Europe, not America, even though America started it and it's the core founding member and the most strongest member. We're not going to relocate NATO headquarters in the U.S. We're going to locate them in Europe, in Brussels, and we're going to always have the leader of the bureaucratic arm of NATO will always be a European, and this is the big and, every actual military action will be headed up by a commander from the United States. So there's always a European in charge of the bureaucracy, and there's always an American in charge of the actual military components of NATO. And that put the French off because they were like, we are not the followers We are a strong military. We do not take rules. We do not follow the rules from other people. They did it up until 1966, but then they had a really strong political leader. Is that Chirac? That became president, and he was former military. And he's the one that said, you know what, we'll stay in NATO, but we are pulling ourselves out of the military command component of it because I don't believe in this. We are basically protesting that French troops would have to be led by an American commander if we ever came to a wartime situation. So we're pulling ourselves out of the actual military strategic command component, even though we're still a member. We'll still contribute. We'll still do that stuff, but we're not coming to the meetings anymore. We're going to take our ball and go home. And she, Marie Le Pen, the possible next French president, is saying, I am on that like French stink on shit. Like French stink on cheese. We are so going to do that exact thing and pull out of that and also try rapprochement with Russia after they settle that whole little Ukraine thing. We want to bridge the ties with Russia. And she's got a decent chance of winning. So back to the person that asked me, only here for the podcast, would Sweden and Finland have joined without this invasion? Seeing what's happening in Europe with the rise of the far right, who may be more friendly to Russia, yeah, I think yes. I think even if Trump says tomorrow, I'm never running again and I don't care anymore, I still think what's going on in French politics would have influenced other NATO members to try to strengthen the union as much as possible before wild cards like Marie Le Pen or Donald Trump or even Viktor Orban of Hungary. These are wild cards who could at any given moment say, you know what, I'm not going to embargo Russia anymore. We like Russia. We don't care. And we don't care about Ukraine. Let them invade whoever they want. It seems foolish from a Hungarian standpoint, since they're pretty close to Russia, but that could happen. And so I think that the politics of Europe moving right would have influenced Sweden and Finland to perhaps go down this route either way. First time chatter from Ryan Crispy. Great screen name, Crispy. My notification on Twitch sucked and I didn't get the update. You went live. What did I miss? It's all recorded, Ryan Crispy, and you can go back and watch it again. Are you in class right now, Ryan Crispy? If you're actually in my class, email me immediately with your screen name and the phrase beets and wheat. Mr. Gaming Person says, what do you think would draw more voters to Trump instead of Harris? What do you think would draw more voters to Trump instead of Harris? Again, I don't really follow American politics. I try not to pay attention at all, Mr. Gaming Person. But it's not really a big secret, and you don't have to really read the news to know that the popularity of the Biden-Harris government is not very strong right now. In fact, it might be labeled as weak. And Mr. Gaming Person, having lived through many elections in my short but almost over life, economics rules the roost. And so I think Donald Trump has I won't even say a chance of winning. I think he has the advantage to win simply because the economy sucks. And the economy doesn't suck, but inflation sucks. And the price of oil is now high, partly because of inflation, partly because of COVID, partly because of the Russian embargo. And so it really doesn't matter to American consumers. Inflation is high. The price of gas is high. People are unhappy. If there is any sort of toilet paper shortage, it's always the president's fault. And so the president and the vice president of the United States are not terribly popular right now. And unless there's some economic miracle that occurs in 2 years, I can tell you the majority of Americans will not be happy with them if the economy is not like way awesome. It's just the way it works. And then you couple that with the diehard Trump cult. And the Trump cult is voting no matter what. Joe Biden could personally put a man on Mars. Joe Biden could personally himself land on Mars and plant a flag, and the economy could explode and everybody becomes a millionaire. And the Trump cult is voting for Trump no matter what. So you have this core of 40 to 50% of the country that's voting against Joe Biden come hell or high water. And then the other 50 or 60% of Democrats and or undecided a lot of them aren't happy. And so to me, you just kind of look at that. It's like, that spells a recipe for disaster for the Democrats in the next election. The bottom line is the Trump cult has 40% of Americans are voting for him no matter what. I don't see that Joe Biden or Kamala Harris has 40% of people voting for them no matter what. That's the question mark. I'm not sure I see it. Could be there, but I don't see it. Sorry if that's bad news for anybody. Just an opinion. Just an opinion. Anything can change in 2 years. Mexican Goose says Finland may join NATO going to a vote soon. Yes. It's going to a vote again, they're saying in weeks, not even months. I'm Wilbur says, I think it's good timing for Finland and Sweden to consider joining. Like, is Russia really going to get involved with them and everything on their to-do list already? Agreed, Mr. Wilbur. It will be. And again, consider this from a strategic, a military strategic standpoint. Pretend like you lead the country or that you're a defense minister of Russia. Sweden and Finland joining is taxing you because you now have to arm a 830-mile border that you previously didn't have to arm. That cost you money. That cost you troops. That cost you troops that could be somewhere else. So it's not a terribly great play for Putin to have done all this and caused this to happen. But again, maybe he wants it to. Maybe he wants it to. Alb 1024 up in Hizzle saying France can't have the U.S. stop them from surrendering. Alb says she does know that de Gaulle told the U.S. and U.K. secretly if anything happened, they'd follow the actual military command structure. No, she does not know that, Al. But thank you, Al, for reminding me. Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle was the president of France in 1966, and de Gaulle was a military guy. De Gaulle fought in World War II. I think he was a prisoner of war for a while. And he's kind of a war hero who became president. And he is the one, a proud military guy, leader of a strong, powerful country who said, this offends us, we're going to pull out of the command. Marine Le Pen and her whole family have never even picked up a gun. I mean, maybe they have, but they certainly haven't done anything to defend their country. So it's a little, to me, slightly offensive for her to take this political stance of, I'm just like the military hero who's standing up to NATO. It's like, girl, you ain't never done nothing to be a military hero. Don't compare yourself to people that fought in World War II against Nazis. For goodness sakes. And that's the Boyer rant on that. Mexican Goose says, oh, by the way, is France still at odds with the AUKUS coalition after the nuclear sub deal? You know, Mexican Goose, that's something else Putin did not think through well enough. He really didn't. For those of you that ever tuned into a former podcast I did called the AUKUS Squawkus, AUKUS stands for AU-UK-US. Let's see, who's that? Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States of America. They have formed a coalition, kind of like a mini NATO, with Australia. The Anglo-only NATO, if you want to call it that. Mostly to counter China. And when this group formed up, it became a big deal last semester because the French were supposed to supply Australia with like $50 billion worth of, I can't remember if it was nuclear subs. It was some sort of a sub. It was not a nuclear sub. The French were supposed to sell this big $50 billion deal. We're selling all these subs to Australia. And then lo and behold, it came out, oh, by the way, the United States is going to sell them $100 billion worth of nuclear subs that stay underwater longer and all this stuff. And it caused a huge fracas. And France got furiously pissed off. Macron got pissed off and was like, how dare you people do? We're all allies. What the hell did you just do? So Putin saw that story. And you know what? Good on you, Mexican Goose, for calling that out. That probably had a lot to do with Putin's thinking that NATO was weak and the West was fragmented, because the French were seriously pissed off about that and were going to take some sort of repercussions. But lo and behold, all the AUKUS squawkus went away since Putin invaded Ukraine. I haven't heard anything about that, Mexican Goose, and you likely won't. So again, Putin, in this bizarre irony, has unified NATO and Team West at a time it was very, very fractured. Now, again, if Donald Trump becomes president again, and Le Pen becomes president in France, you could see it all fracture again. But that's a bridge we'll have to burn once we get to it. Mr. Gaming Person says, so basically he will win on economics, even though neither candidate is very well liked. Economics usually does carry the day, Mr. Gaming Person. Usually. I mean, the last election wasn't about economics. It was really about Trump. I mean, it was really this polarized country we live in. The two political parties can't stand each other so much that it was about the people. This time, though, it's going to be a replay of that a little bit, but the economics thing is a much more dire circumstances than it was last go-round. First time chatter from Dr. Knockers. Dr. Knockers, great screen name. Says cancel student debt and start prosecuting all the 1-6 organizers. Got it. I think they're already doing many of those folks have already gone to court or are in court right now, Dr. Knockers. That's been happening. Several of them already been convicted, I'm pretty sure. Canceling student debt. I think Joe Biden has already walked away from that one. Trust me, I'm still paying student debt. I'd like them to cancel the damn student debt, but I think it might collapse the economy if they did it. There's more student debt than there is housing debt. And it was the housing bubble that caused the economic meltdown in 2008, 2009. So just saying you're going to cancel student debt, it's like, sure, you can do that and all the students be happy, and then the economy would implode. So I'm not even sure how that happens, but he's been walking back from that pledge already anyway. Ari B saying in regards to Biden going to Mars, didn't Russia just announce it's restarting its moon landings? I did not see that, Ari B. Could you email me any stories you've seen about that? I'd be fascinated. Pedestrian of the Apocalypse says one can only hope Russia's skills in moon landings equal their current skills in land warfare. I love the people. I love the brave, the bold, the few that come hang out with me in this chat room. You make it a genuine pleasure to teach about international affairs with comments like that. And only here for the podcast says, in that they remember to bring food. Hold your breath and pray, and hold your breath for the glory of Mother Russia to come. Yeah, that's could be. Dr. Knocker says, I'm talking at the same level as clapping brown people abroad. Black side territory. They're not serious about 1-6 organizers. I'm not sure I understand that because I think some of them have been convicted already, Dr. Knockers. I'm pretty sure one or two of them were convicted just yesterday. But I don't really follow domestic news that much. I've not followed those particular stories, but I know I saw headlines pop up, a couple of them, like this guy already went to jail and this guy already got convicted. Well, I know one guy got off, but. Okay, well, do we have any other comments, questions? It is 9:28. We are 28 minutes past our online Twitch hour. But it happens because we get so many great, hilarious comments and good questions in the chat room. So did you learn a little something about the growth of NATO? NATO, in fact, where did I see that one at? Not here, not there. Was it here? Look at this. So we're talking about it looks like NATO growth spurt number 5 is perhaps underway now. And this is an unpredicted one. But Russia has really made it all come together for Team NATO. So Russian coming to your border? Uh-oh, better get in NATO. That's what we're talking about right there. Hope you learned a little something. Party on as always. Sorry I missed Monday. Got too busy at the bar. I will try to be back next Monday, but if not, we'll push for Wednesday again. And if you could all, Ryan Crispy, hit me up. I told you to hit me up. Email me with the phrase beets and wheat and beets. And then you get the bonus points. And Mexican Goose says you need to learn how to raid another streamer instead of just signing off. What does that mean, raid another streamer?
It means you send somebody who's watching here to another channel.
Oh.
I did it once, the other professor.
I would love to do that. I don't know how to do it, though. Mexican Goose, you guys know I'm clueless. Why don't Katie send us or raid another professor?
There's not really many of them.
Wheats and beats, Roger. All right, Mr. Gaming Person and Mexican Goose, who should we go raid? Can we pick a target? Can we collectively pick a target? And then I'll go there too, because I want to see how this works. Pick me a target. Whilst I sip on some gorgeous 10-year-old Spanish wine. Okay, Mr. Gaming Person's got one. Yes, it is a
said,
Rioja.
Well, no. Needs to be a small channel. Not moist.
Oh, is Moist Critical a super giant one?
I guess.
This raid could be worse than the Bay of Pigs.